judges should never change a law because they disagree with it. They have to follow the law, even when they don't like it, and even when they disagree with it, they have to follow the law.
Welcome to the Seeing Red podcast with Andy Turner and Garrett Fools, checking up on Texas policies and politics with some federal issues thrown in, like the assault weapons ban, interest rate hikes, you get it, but it's mostly Texas, since we can't ignore the big stuff either. And now, here are your hosts, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools.
Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's Seeing Red. We have a very special guest with us and we will introduce her in a moment. I want to thank you all for tuning in, whether you're on the podcast side of things or if you are on YouTube. Again, you can find us on YouTube. We are on video now, so youtube.com/seeingredpod. Let us know your thoughts, facebook.com, the Seeing Red Pod. You can email us at hosts, HOSTS, at seeingredpodcast.com, and of course on Twitter at the Seeing Red Pod. And as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, our Twitter, Garrett and I have our Twitter handles. Wow. Up on the video. So, if you want us directly or you want the podcast, please go ahead. But we're super glad you're here. And so we have a super fabulous guest, Garrett.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we do. Today we have Judge Michelle Slaughter. She is a jurist on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. She's running for re-election this year, and she's, has a lot to say. Got to talk to her briefly before the show started, so we're really looking forward to the episode. Welcome to the judge. Welcome to the judge. Welcome to the show, Judge. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing great. It's wonderful to be a part of this show.
Well, fantastic. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what led you to the Court of Criminal Appeals. I believe you're running for re-election. This is for your second term. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I was first elected to the court in 2018 when there was an open seat because Judge Alcala retired. And so I'm served a little more than 5 years on the Court of Criminal Appeals at this point. And before that, I was a trial judge in Galveston County for 6 years. And I first ran for that position because I was tired of complaining about what I was seeing on the bench in my home county of Galveston County. And while I loved being an attorney, I loved what I was doing. I had a great career. I was willing to take a more than 50% pay cut to run because I just couldn't, take it anymore. I had to do something about the activism and the liberal nature of the judge who was there at that point. And so I ran against and beat a 12-year incumbent Democrat to become a judge in the 405th District Court of Galveston County. And I cleaned up the court. I took it from the least efficient, least effective district court with the highest backlog and turned it into the most efficient, most effective district court, the lowest backlog in Galveston County. And I did that within my first 2 years on the bench and was very proud to serve, honored to serve. And when I had the opportunity to serve at a higher level, I decided to run for the Court of Criminal Appeals.
Well, that's fantastic.
That's awesome.
On that, there's a lot of jurisdictions where there's currently massive backlogs near us both. I'm in Fort Bend County. Near us both, Harris County has tremendous backlogs based off of political policy that's created those. If we were to be able to elect Republican judges at the district court level in those jurisdictions, how would they go about cleaning that up like you did? Like, how does one clean up that docket? Is it just... I'm just curious.
It's a lot of work. It's basically a judge needs to be sitting on that bench for as long as possible, moving cases and calling cases to trial, denying repeated requests for continuance, and basically making, putting deadlines on attorneys, because by nature, I think attorneys are for the most part procrastinators. And so if you put a hard deadline on an attorney, then that usually helps move things along. And so there's that. And then there's just the matter of calling cases to trial and not avoiding cases. I know there are some judges who avoid certain types of cases and that's not a good thing to do. And sometimes there'll be cases that we refer to as docket blockers, that cases that are going to take weeks to try. And so a lot of times judges want to avoid those, but the solution on those and something I was able to do is for cases that were going to take a long time to try, I'd bring in a visiting judge to try the longer case. And I moved, 20 cases the time it took to move that one. So that helped resolve the issue. And so I would do that on occasion. I also implemented different policies where, just getting people into the courtroom to, along with the clients, to discuss the cases, that helped move things along. So we had, for instance, a lot of lower level felonies that were just sitting around where the attorneys weren't doing a whole lot. And we would call in the prosecutor assigned to the case, the defense attorney assigned to the case, and bring in the client. So if they were in the jail, we'd bring them over from the jail, or else we'd require them to appear if they were out on bond. And just getting all the parties in one room together and to discuss the case a lot of times resolved the matter. So that's really what it took to reduce that backlog.
Well, that's good for all of us to know what we're looking for. At a lot of we know where there's a lot of races on the ballot when it comes to primaries and general elections. I believe Harris County has like a 5-page ballot in the primary.
Yes.
Probably be longer during the general. It's like notoriously one of the longest in the country.
Yep.
So when you're looking and doing the research on your candidates, it's kind of good to know what does make a good qualified person at the district level and at the Court of Criminal Appeals level. So why don't you talk a little bit about your current race and your qualifications, and maybe contrast that with your opponents, and talk a little bit about why we should be voting for you in the upcoming primary election.
Sure. Well, I'm a constitutional conservative. I'm a proven constitutional conservative and originalist judge, and I will never be an activist judge. I will always strictly interpret our Constitution and laws as written and as originally intended, even if I do not like the law or the outcome. Because as Justice Scalia said, and I'm paraphrasing, if you're a judge and you like every decision that you make, you're probably not doing it right. And that is because judges should never change a law because they disagree with it. They have to follow the law, even when they don't like it, and even when they disagree with it, they have to follow the law. And sometimes we don't like the outcome. That it comes from following the law. But again, it's not our job to like what we do, like the outcome that we have. It is our job to follow the law. And so I've proven that I will strictly interpret the law as written and as originally intended. And I have 11 years of judicial experience at this point, more than 11 years, 6 years as a trial judge and a little over 5 years as a judge on the Court of Criminal Appeals. My opponent has no judicial experience at all. He's never been a judge. He's handled minimal criminal law and almost no appellate law cases. And so my credentials are far superior to his. He may very well be a nice man. I've only met him once. And even though I've gone all over the state campaigning and been in a different city just every day to different candidate forums, I've only met him once. So I can't speak to him as a person, but just his experience is lacking for this position, because this is the highest criminal court in Texas. This is the criminal Supreme Court. In Texas, we have a split Supreme Court. The Texas Supreme Court is the Supreme Court for civil cases, and the Court of Criminal Appeals is the Supreme Court for criminal cases. So you need someone with the right experience and credentials to be on this court. It's not a training ground. And so I would certainly hope that voters would recognize that it's important to have the experience I have and the judicial philosophy that I've proven to have as well.
Right. So you can be the nicest human on the planet, and nobody's saying anything. That I don't know. I don't recall your opponent's name, but he could be the greatest human being on the planet. But you want a judge, and I say this even though you're on the show. I don't say it because you're on the show, but you want people qualified.
Right.
I mean, I have a lot of experience. No legal things hanging on my wall, but I have a lot of experience dealing with judiciary committees and lawyers and this and that and the other thing. And the bottom line is either you're qualified or you're not.
Right.
I mean, and we talked before the show how Garrett and I are kind of political nerds, and there's nothing that gives me greater pleasure than to sit and read an opinion. Like when SCOTUS,
No.
when federal SCOTUS rules on something, and I'm like, wait, what? What? I'm the geek that's in there reading it just so I understand the logic of their decision.
Right.
And I still may not agree with them, but at least I can see where they're coming from. And so you have a record of these opinions, and you are well versed in handling these things. And it sounds like even your background before you became a judge,
Right.
you had the background to handle this job. So you hit the ground running, and now you've been doing it for what, 5 years?
Yes, a little over 5 years now.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So
Yep.
you said on this, there's two high courts in Texas, Court of Criminal Appeals and the Supreme Court, because the Texas Constitution separated out trial or criminal and civil. Is that correct?
Yeah, so originally it was not separate. Originally there was the Texas Supreme Court, and then came along a single Court of Appeals, which was the predecessor to the Court of Criminal Appeals. But then based upon caseload and the growing population of Texas, then in 1891, there was a constitutional amendment to create the Court of Criminal Appeals as a separate Supreme Court for criminal cases. And we're actually one of the busiest appellate courts in the nation at this
I
point.
would imagine.
Yes, and that is because we have discretionary review on direct appeal cases. We are original jurisdiction on appeals of death penalty cases. So death penalty appeals come straight to us. They don't go to one of the intermediate courts of appeals. And then also we have original jurisdiction over all post-conviction writs of habeas corpus. And what that is where when a criminal defendant has been convicted and they have something to challenge that conviction or some aspect of their conviction outside the normal appellate process, like if there's new evidence or a witness recants or there's proof of ineffective assistance of counsel, things like that. Those could be reasons that someone would file a post-conviction writ to challenge their conviction or some aspect of it. And so those number in the thousands, because as you can imagine, every person in prison is trying to get out, and so they're filing these writs with us, and some are meritorious, but most are not. And then we review all of those. And so we receive about 3 times the number of filings as the Texas Supreme Court does. And we issue about 3 times the number of opinions that they do as well. And they are very hardworking and very busy. That's not to take anything away from the Texas Supreme Court. It's just to illustrate how very busy we are.
Sure. When it comes to one of the issues you just mentioned, Texas has a higher rate of people being released because of DNA evidence coming out later after the fact. I think it's because Dallas County's crime lab ended up keeping a lot of samples a lot longer than others did. When you look at that sort of stuff, is there anything on the horizon that's similar where we might see more convictions overturned as technology is advanced further and further? I'm just more out of curiosity than out of anything else, just based off of what you're seeing.
Well, that's a possibility. Of course, the law struggles and can't, quite frankly, keep up with the advances in technology and in forensics. So the court does have a interest in forensics, and we manage a grant. The court manages a grant that the legislature has assigned to us to manage it. It's an education grant. And as part of that education, we also do involve forensics and forensic scientists and things like that. So we're learning new things all the time that come into play in our criminal justice system. So, there's certainly possibilities. And of course, when humans are involved in our criminal justice system, and therefore there's going to be flaws, there's going to be mistakes. And so because of that, then that can result in the overturning of cases based upon human error and human mistakes. And sometimes it's a one case deal, sometimes it's widespread. And so we have to address those cases as they come to us.
Absolutely. One of the cases that came to you recently was a case involving, or original or not. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if it's original jurisdiction, but the Attorney General's office was granted by the legislature the ability to pursue election voter fraud cases, and some cases came up to you. Can you explain that case a little bit, and then the ruling that y'all made?
Sure. So that was the State v. Stevens case, and it came up to us on a pretrial writ of habeas corpus. So it was before the case went to trial. And in that case, the sheriff in Jefferson County, well, first of all, the FBI had been investigating some various candidates over some issues. And in the process of investigating other candidates, the FBI determined that there may be an issue with Zena Stevens on her campaign finance report. Specifically, that Sheriff Stevens had accepted a $5,000 cash contribution, which isn't allowed, but she reported it. It was reported on her campaign finance report under the $50 or less cash contribution section. And because that wasn't allowed, the FBI turned that over to the district attorney in Jefferson County, who declined to prosecute, said this is a matter for the Texas Ethics Commission. It's a campaign finance reporting issue, or I'm not going to take this up, or whatever the situation was there. But anyway, so the DA declined to prosecute, and the Attorney General, under an election code statute that provides that the Attorney General may prosecute violations of the election code, determined that his office would go ahead and prosecute this. So the Attorney General's office took the case, took it to neighboring Chambers County, impaneled a grand jury, and was able to get an indictment for a state jail felony, tampering with a government document. So before that went to trial, Sheriff Stevens challenged the ability of the Attorney General to prosecute her, said that the statute that under which he was prosecuting was unconstitutional under the Texas Constitution separation of powers provision. And it went through the Court of Appeals, and then it came to us, and we, after looking at the issue, we agreed it was a plain language interpretation and a strict interpretation of the Texas Constitution as written and as originally intended demonstrated that, yes, that the Attorney General, first of all, the legislature does not have the ability to assign to the Attorney General a duty that is expressly assigned to the district attorneys. And again, that's because under the Texas Constitution, we have an express separation of powers provision. Right. The Attorney General is in the executive department under the Texas Constitution. He has specific enumerated duties, all of which are civil law duties. He has no criminal jurisdiction under the Texas Constitution. And then he actually even has limited authority in the trial courts. Because under the judicial branch, where the district attorneys are located, the district attorneys and county attorneys are assigned the express constitutional duty. They shall represent the state of Texas in all cases in the district and inferior. So those are the trial courts. So it is the district attorney's express constitutional duty to bring criminal prosecutions, in other words. And has been, and I wrote a 73-page opinion on rehearing and took us back to when Texas was part of Mexico to explain why our Texas Constitution was set up the way it was, and to demonstrate that since 1836, when the district attorney position was constitutionally created in Texas, when it was the Republic of Texas, that ever since that time, it has always been the district attorney and county attorney's duties to prosecute all criminal cases, and that the Attorney General has never had that authority. So again, even
so
go ahead.
AG civil stuff,
yes,
district attorney's criminal stuff, and correct. That is in the Constitution.
Correct.
It's like
What was the
really up and read it right now?
like it's really clear,
and it's early in the Constitution, right? It's like sections 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 or something. It's pretty early on. You don't have to dig deep into it to find these.
Right. So yeah, when you look at the text constitutions, it's divided up, and you can see the sections, for executive branch, and then the one for judicial branch, and then look under the subsections, and you see one that says attorney general under the executive branch, and one that says district and county attorneys under the judicial branch.
So what we've got here is a plain text reading, and even though they passed a bill that became law, what they needed to do, if I understand correctly, Your Honor, if what they needed to do was put this question on the ballot to change the Constitution, and the legislature did not do that.
Right.
So the law is invalid because Constitution preempts everything.
Absolutely. The Constitution is the superior law of the land, and statutes cannot overrule the Constitution. It is the Constitution first, because that is, the will of we the people. And so that, that has to come first and be the priority. Now, I will tell you, so the Attorney General tried to propose that there's a catch-all provision under the executive, under his duties in the executive branch, and it's something to the effect of that the legislature can assign him other duties. And so, it's basically he can perform other duties as may be required by law, is what it says. And so he tried to use that as a catch-all provision to allow for this statute to be constitutional. But again, that's, when you look at the original interpretation, original meaning of that phrase, that's not what it was intended to be. In my opinion, I cite to an 1874 case. So 2 years before our 1876 Constitution was ratified, the Texas Supreme Court interpreted that exact provision that was used for other executive officers. And that exact provision, it had to be that the type of duties of that office, it had to be the duties of that particular officer, fall within those duties. And it could not be a duty that was expressly assigned by the Constitution to another officer in a different department. So that catch-all provision cannot be used. And so again, that was an 1874 opinion that interpreted it. So the 1876 ratifying voters of the Constitution knew what that phrase meant when they ratified the 1876 Constitution, because those opinions were published in the newspapers and people read them back then. And so the voters knew what that phrase meant when it was included in the Attorney General's provision in the executive department. And then even just, I think it was 4 or 6 years later, after the Texas Constitution was ratified, there was another Supreme Court opinion that construed that specific phrase, that specific provision under the Attorney General. So pertaining to the division of powers between the district attorneys and the Attorney General's duties. And that Supreme Court opinion said the exact same thing. No, the Attorney General cannot be assigned duties that are expressly assigned to district attorneys.
So
you're not expressing... Oh, go ahead, Andy.
So not only do we have a plain text reading of the Constitution, which is like the main thing, and then the laws that we pass fall under that. But now we also have supporting opinions. So what you said
from the
was
time
not
too, not just opinions down the road, like from the same era, so they could have a better understanding of what those words meant to that.
So this is not groundbreaking. You didn't go off the reservation and Constitution first, and oh, by the way, here's these opinions that interpreted what the Constitution says. And so now, Garrett, am I correct in my understanding that the Attorney General is less than thrilled with this outcome?
I mean, I'm from my opinion, from the outside looking in, it appears as if he's not thrilled with it, and he's using it as a cudgel to go after yet another group of people.
Yeah,
he's going after.
That's what I don't
know. 75% of the House of Representatives, a couple senators on Twitter, the comptroller. kind of going after everybody. I think he blamed God at one point, and the Court of Criminal Appeals. And he's also kind of agitating against the Supreme Court, but it seems more of a threat than an actual action at this point. But Judge Slaughter, what are you seeing from your side of it? Would you say he's like coming after y'all pretty hard?
I would say that's accurate, and it's very unfortunate because we're, as a court, the Court of Criminal Appeals is a very strong conservative law and order court, and we, and as I've shown, like I am a constitutional conservative and originalist judge who always strictly interprets our Constitution and laws as written and as originally intended. That's what I was elected to do. I'm not going to be an activist judge based upon who's involved in a case or the issues involved. And I hate voter fraud just as much as anyone does. And my job depends on free and fair elections. And so I certainly don't want to promote voter fraud, and I don't like voter fraud. We need to prosecute it for sure. But my job as a judge cannot be outcome derivative. I can't say this is the outcome I want and then work backwards to manipulate the law to reach that outcome. And I won't do that because my role as a judge is I take my oath very seriously, and my allegiance is to the letter of the law and not to a particular person or particular outcome.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, would you say? Well, I guess I'll frame it this way. With all of the rancor when it comes to this issue in particular, would you say that Texas, every state has a different way of electing judges or selecting judges. Some states kind of use a federal model where they're selected and appointed and then confirmed by a Senate. Some people do longer terms. I believe Wisconsin does 10-year terms, and you can only be reelected once. There's all these sorts of mechanisms in place in different states. Would you say Texas has a good system, a great system, the best system? I mean, when you're looking at this, you want to make sure you're accountable to the people, but you also want to make sure you're not also too susceptible to this kind of political attack based off rulings that are completely legitimate.
Right. And as far as the system, I think that electing judges is still a good system. I really do. And especially knowing Texas history and why we elect our judges and why we elect all sorts of positions. It is because our elected leaders need to be held accountable for their actions, period. But when it comes to judges, I hate seeing this political pressure placed on judges to be activists on behalf of a political agenda. And, that is wrong.
It's not your job.
Right.
It's not your job.
Right. Yes. When it comes to judges, people need to understand that you need to look at the credentials. You need to look at the work ethic. You need to look at, and they need to not be activists. They don't, you don't want someone who's got a social justice agenda or some other type of agenda, who's going to go in there and try to be an activist to change the law to meet their agenda. And that's what you have to flesh out through the election process and through a primary process and maybe even partisan elections. But the fact of the matter is that I welcome the opportunity to speak to the voters and tell them my credentials. I welcome the scrutiny. I welcome the voice that the voters have, and that I will be held accountable if I don't do my job. What I don't welcome is partisan political pressure being exerted so forcefully on the judiciary as a whole, and people expecting judges to be activists in a partisan way, or activists at all, but then certainly not to satisfy a political agenda. And I think most voters don't. I think most voters want us to do the job that we're doing, but there is a very loud, vocal, smaller group that seem to push for us to be activists. And there's been tremendous political rhetoric in that direction. And that's very disheartening to me.
Sure.
Yeah, I can understand.
One thing I talked to a couple of friends about that we were going to have you on the show, and they had worked in politics on the kind of field rep type positions back when you ran the first time, and they said they saw you in like 3 different areas of the state, not just 3 different events. You were all over the state, and just a quick look at your Twitter I saw you doing the same thing. You mentioned earlier. I think you said you're going to be in Huntsville later this week or whatever soon,
Right.
and then you have other things. You're crisscrossing the state.
Yes.
I mean, how many miles would you say you think you've put on your car, just in the past month or so, or past year or whatever, campaigning to go across the state of Texas?
I have no idea, but it has been a lot. I've been in a different city pretty much every single day since early January, and then even before then, when collecting petition signatures before the Christmas break, I was for months I was all over the state, and from Amarillo to El Paso to East Texas, to Corpus to and a lot of small towns too. I love going to our rural areas of Texas and seeing them as well. So I've been to George West and Port Lavaca and just recently, and so Yoakum. I've been to all sorts of places, and I love interacting with people, and I love interacting with the voters, and I love sharing my passion and enthusiasm for our court and our justice system and the rule of law. Because y'all say you're political nerds. I'm a law nerd, so
right.
Yeah. So George West, I'm just trying to I know George West is down in South Texas. Yoakum, is that the Panhandle or like near the Panhandle?
No, it's not too far from George West. It's like South Central, I suppose.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Regardless, yeah, you're getting all over the state. So thank you for going out and actually talking to voters. With those conversations, what sort of things are people asking a judge for the Court of Criminal Appeals that are like, what would you say the most important question is to the voters looking at that race?
The most important question seems to be understanding our State v. Stevens opinion. Because I think the people assume that we did the right thing, but they need to understand it, because no one likes voter fraud, and everyone is worried about it. And we all recognize that there are some DAs out there who there's a huge concern that they'll never prosecute voter fraud if it benefits their side. And so there's a huge concern about that across the state, and I certainly understand that concern. But as I explained to the voters that, look, this comes down to judges should never, ever judicially amend our Texas Constitution. The Constitution says what it says, means what it means, and as judges in the Court of Appeals, we're going to strictly construe that Constitution as written and as originally intended. And if there needs to be a change to that Constitution, it has to be done by the voters. There has to be a constitutional amendment that's proposed and voted on, and judges should not be the ones to judicially amend it.
Absolutely. Well,
I couldn't agree more.
Andy, I think I've run out of my questions. Do you have any?
No, I'm good. I'm good. She rolled right with things I was going to ask, but she covered it all. And I will say, Garrett, and I'm going to direct this to Garrett, Your Honor, so you don't have to comment on it. But for me personally, I am tired of if you don't agree with me, I'm coming for you campaign style coming out of the Attorney General's campaign. Can we please talk about the issues? Could we talk about policy? Could we talk about these things? No, we're busy with vitriol, and I am sick of it. Absolutely sick of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Judge Slaughter, I have one last question.
Yes.
What is the difference between a judge and a justice?
Sure. So in Texas, we do things a little differently. So generally speaking, typically speaking, justices are going to be your appellate court judges. So if they're on a court of appeals, are typically referred to as a justice, whereas trial judges are typically referred to as judge. But in Texas, when the Court of Criminal Appeals was constitutionally created in 1891, then we were designated as judges. So we have a presiding judge and 8 judges, according to the Texas Constitution, whereas the Texas Supreme Court has a chief justice and 8 justices. And so that's just how I guess the Texas Constitution wanted to differentiate the 2 courts as being the 2 high courts, but separate but equal courts, and just with different jurisdictions as far as civil versus criminal. But yes, so we are on the Court of Criminal Appeals. We are judges, whereas the Texas Supreme Court are justices.
Okay.
And one last thing, Your Honor. If anybody wants more information about you, where can they find out more information about you?
Sure. So I have a website, judgemichelleslaughter.com. I'm on Twitter and I'm on Facebook. And so you can find out information. I put a lot of my, campaign travels on there. So you can, especially Facebook. I just more recently took to Twitter. I was just more used to Facebook, so I was using that more. But you can see all my different stops along the way. If I remember to take photos, I try to do that each time. And so you can see where I've been all over the state. And then now, as I mentioned, more recently, I've been posting on Twitter to try to reach that audience as well.
Excellent. Okay. All right.
Well, and you did mention that you just got on Twitter. There was some news made when you identified a certain account had tweeted something at you and then quickly deleted it, that indicated that the person might be the Attorney General's burner account.
Right.
Any thoughts or comments on the aftermath from that, or just kind of explain what happened there?
Sure. I had posted something and then there were, different responses to my post. And one was, a post that was, to say very negative. And when I went to respond to it and correct the misinformation, I noticed that the post said something about like my office's ability. I think it was like my office's ability to prosecute voter fraud.
I read that.
Yes. Yeah. And so, it was from Patty something. And so when I saw that, I said, wait a minute, it says my office's ability. And then the post had been deleted, but I had, I was able to take a screenshot of it. And so then I shared that, noticing that it said my office's ability. So then I questioned, is this the Attorney General posting this? Or did he send this language to someone and then they posted it and forgot to edit it? So I don't know. I have no proof as to who sent it or what, but I thought that was interesting and unusual. So
do you think it's appropriate for the Attorney General to go around attacking who he seems to perceive as political opponents anonymously on Twitter, like a online troll?
I'm not going to comment on that, but everyone has the right to free speech, and
Sure.
I'm not going to comment on it. I would certainly rather someone be more direct if they're going to say something rather than post something anonymously. But then you look in our history, and sometimes some of the most influential pieces of literature and political writing was done anonymously. So
that's true.
Under a pen name.
That's true.
Yeah.
So, well, I do appreciate you coming on. I know Andy does as well. Thank you so much for taking time out off the campaign trail just to talk to us a little bit more about what you've been doing, and then all the campaign activities. We're very thankful to have you on. For those of you who are listening to this on the audio podcast, this is available on YouTube as a video podcast. In the future, make sure you go and listen to us at youtube.com.
Watch us
at the Seeing Red Pod. We appreciate you joining in with us to our conversation with Judge Slaughter. And like once again, she said, what was your email? Not email, your website?
It's judgemichelleslaughter.com, and Michelle is Michelle.
We'll include that in our description for today's episode. That way you can find that website a little bit more quickly, so you can read a little bit more about her if you're interested. But Judge, thank you so much for joining us, and everyone else, we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to the Seeing Red podcast. It's always Texas politics and beyond. We present the facts and opinions. The Seeing Red podcast with your host, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools. Thank you, and tune in next week. And please do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode.